The afternoon sun was already getting low when 12-year-old Devin finished basketball practice at the community center. His sneakers squeaked against the polished gym floor as he grabbed his backpack and water bottle. Coach Williams had kept them running drills for an extra 30 minutes, which meant Devin was now running late getting home. "See you tomorrow, D," called out his teammate Antonio as Devin headed toward the exit. Devin waved back, pushing through the heavy glass doors into the crisp autumn air. The parking lot was nearly empty now, with most kids having been picked up by their parents an hour ago. Devin didn't mind walking home alone. He actually preferred it sometimes. It gave him time to think about the game they had coming up next week, or about the math test he needed to study for. Plus, he knew a shortcut through Riverside Park that would get him home in half the time it would take to walk around the main streets. The park was one of those places that looked different depending on the time of day. In the morning, it was full of joggers and people walking their dogs. During lunch, office workers would sit on benches eating sandwiches. But late in the afternoon like this, it was mostly quiet and peaceful. Devin followed the familiar path that wound through the open grass area where families usually had picnics on weekends. The playground equipment sat empty, with just a few leaves scattered across the swings that moved slightly in the breeze. He could hear the distant sound of traffic from the main road. But here in the park, everything felt calm and safe. As he walked, Devin found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with his grandmother that morning over breakfast. Grandma Rose had been watching the news again, shaking her head at another story about problems in their city. "You be careful out there, baby," she'd said, like she did almost every day. "Keep your eyes open and stay out of trouble." Devin loved his grandmother more than anything in the world. She'd been taking care of him since he was 7, after his parents died in a car accident. Grandma Rose worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and clothes on his back, and she never complained about having to raise a kid at her age. But Devin could see the worry lines around her eyes getting deeper each year. The path through the park curved toward a more wooded area near the old creek. This was the part of his shortcut that saved the most time, though it meant walking through some pretty thick trees and bushes. Devin had been using this route for over a year now and had never had any problems. Sometimes he'd see other people cutting through here too, mostly teenagers or adults who seemed to know about the same shortcut. As Devin approached the wooded section, he could hear the gentle sound of water flowing over rocks in the creek. The trees were starting to change colors, with yellow and orange leaves creating a carpet on the ground. He stepped carefully over a fallen branch and continued along the narrow dirt path that other people had worn down over time. That's when he heard voices coming from somewhere ahead of him and off to the left. Devin stopped, walking, and listened carefully. At first, he thought it might be other kids from school, or maybe some teenagers hanging out by the creek. But as he stood still and paid attention, something about the voices made him feel uneasy. They sounded serious, almost urgent. His first instinct was to just keep walking and mind his own business. Grandma Rose had always taught him not to get involved in other people's affairs. "Walk away from trouble before trouble finds you," she'd say. But curiosity was getting the better of him, and the voices were coming from right near the path he needed to take anyway. Devin stepped off the main path and moved quietly toward a large oak tree. He could hide behind it and see what was going on without being noticed. As he got closer, the voices became clearer, and what he heard made his stomach drop. "Hurry up with that thing," one voice said. "We don't have much time before someone comes through here." "I'm going as fast as I can," replied another voice. "This ground is harder than I thought it would be." Devin carefully peered around the oak tree, and what he saw made his heart start beating faster. 2 police officers in full uniform were kneeling next to the creek, about 20 feet away from where Devin was hiding. One of them was holding a large black bag, while the other was using his hands to dig a shallow hole in the soft earth near some fallen logs. Devin recognized one of the officers immediately. It was Officer Rodriguez, who came to their school sometimes to talk to classes about safety and staying away from drugs. Devin had always thought Officer Rodriguez seemed like a good guy, the kind of police officer who actually cared about helping people. But seeing him here, in the woods burying something in secret, made Devin feel confused and scared. The second officer looked around nervously while Officer Rodriguez placed the black bag in the hole and started covering it with dirt and fallen leaves. "Are you sure no one followed us here?" the second officer asked. "I'm sure," Officer Rodriguez replied, but his voice sounded tense. "This spot is perfect. Nobody ever comes back here except for kids taking shortcuts, and they never pay attention to anything. Devin felt a chill run down his spine. He was one of those kids taking shortcuts, and he was definitely paying attention now. As the officers continued working, Devin tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Why would police officers be hiding something in the woods? What could be in that bag that was so important they had to bury it in secret? All the stories he'd heard on the news, all the conversations adults had in hushed voices when they thought kids weren't listening, suddenly came flooding back to his mind. Devin had grown up hearing about police officers who got in trouble for doing bad things. Was he witnessing something like that right now? The officers finished covering the bag and stood up, brushing dirt off their hands and uniforms. Officer Rodriguez looked directly toward the area where Devin was hiding, and for a terrifying moment Devin thought he'd been spotted. But the officer was just scanning the woods in general, making sure no one was around. Nobody can know about this, Officer Rodriguez said quietly to his partner. If word gets out, we're finished. Our careers, our families, everything we've worked for will be gone. The second officer nodded grimly. I know, but we didn't have any other choice. The situation was getting out of hand. Devin watched as the two officers made their way back toward the main path, their footsteps crunching through the fallen leaves. He stayed perfectly still behind the oak tree until he couldn't hear their voices anymore, his mind racing with questions and fears. What had he just witnessed? What was in that bag? And most importantly, what was he supposed to do now? As Devin finally continued on his way home, walking quickly through the growing shadows of the late afternoon, he couldn't shake the image of those two officers burying that mysterious bag. By the time he reached his grandmother's front porch, he had made a decision that would change everything, but he had no idea just how much his life was about to. Devin pushed open the front door of his grandmother's small house, and the familiar smell of her cooking filled his nostrils. Any other day, the scent of her famous chicken and rice would have made his mouth water and gotten him excited for dinner. But today his stomach felt twisted in knots. That you, baby? Grandma Rose called from the kitchen. You're later than usual. Practice run long again? Yeah, Grandma, Devin replied, dropping his backpack by the door. He tried to make his voice sound normal, but it came out a little shaky. Coach had us doing extra drills. Devin walked into the kitchen where his grandmother stood at the stove, stirring a large pot with a wooden spoon. Grandma Rose was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had a presence that filled any room she entered. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore the same blue work uniform she put on every day for her job at the hospital laundry. She turned around and looked at Devin with those sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. You feeling all right? You look a little pale. I'm fine, Devin said quickly, probably too quickly. Just tired from all the running. Grandma Rose studied his face for another moment, then nodded and turned back to her cooking. Well, go wash up. Dinner will be ready in about 10 minutes. Devin headed to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. Looking at himself in the small mirror above the sink, he could see what his grandmother meant. His brown skin did look pale, and there were dark circles starting to form under his eyes. His hands were still trembling slightly from what he'd witnessed in the woods. During dinner, Devin barely touched his food. He pushed the rice around his plate and took small bites of chicken, but everything tasted like cardboard. His mind kept replaying the scene over and over again. The two police officers, the black bag, the urgent whispers about keeping secrets. Devin, honey, you sure you're feeling okay? Grandma Rose asked, setting down her fork. You've hardly eaten anything. I'm just not very hungry tonight, Devin said, avoiding her eyes. He hated lying to his grandmother, but how could he tell her what he'd seen? How could he explain that he'd witnessed something that might be illegal, and he didn't know what to do about it? Maybe you're coming down with something, she said, reaching over to feel his forehead with the back of her hand. You don't feel feverish, but you definitely don't seem like yourself. After dinner, Devin went to his room and tried to focus on his homework. He had math problems to solve and a history chapter to read, but the words and numbers on the pages just blurred together. Every few minutes, he'd find himself staring out his bedroom window, thinking about that black bag buried somewhere in the woods. What could have been inside it? Money, drugs, evidence from a crime? The possibilities ran through his mind, each one worse than the last. Devin had grown up hearing stories from kids at school about police officers who got in trouble for taking bribes or planting evidence. He'd always hoped those were just rumors, but now he didn't know what to believe. Around 9 o'clock, Grandma Rose knocked on his door. "Lights out in 30 minutes, she called. "Don't stay up too late with those books." "Okay, Grandma," Devin replied. But he knew sleep wasn't going to come easily tonight. When he finally turned off his lamp and got into bed, Devin stared at the ceiling in the darkness. The house was quiet except for the sound of his grandmother's television in the living room. She always watched the late news before going to bed, something she'd done for as long as Devin could remember. Devin closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. He kept thinking about Officer Rodriguez, who had always seemed like one of the good ones. The officer came to their school at least once a month, talking to classes about making good choices and staying safe. He always had a smile for the kids and seemed to genuinely care about their community. But if Officer Rodriguez was really one of the good guys, why was he burying things in secret? And why did he look so nervous and scared while he was doing it? Devin rolled over onto his side, pulling his pillow over his head. Maybe he should just forget about the whole thing. Maybe it was better not to get involved. His grandmother had always taught him to stay out of other people's business, especially when it came to anything that might be dangerous. But then he remembered the look of fear in Officer Rodriguez's eyes, and the way both officers kept looking around nervously. Whatever they were doing, they were terrified of getting caught. That had to mean something bad, right? Around midnight, Devin heard his grandmother turn off the television and go to her room. The house became completely quiet, but sleep still wouldn't come. He tossed and turned for what felt like hours, his mind going back and forth between different possibilities. Maybe he should tell his grandmother what he'd seen. Grandma Rose was the smartest person Devin knew, and she always gave him good advice when he had problems. But what if she didn't believe him? What if she thought he was making up stories or letting his imagination run wild? Even worse, what if she did believe him, and it put their family in danger? Devin had heard enough stories about what happened to people who got on the wrong side of corrupt police officers. He couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to his grandmother because of something he'd witnessed. But keeping it secret felt wrong, too. If those officers were really doing something illegal, shouldn't someone know about it? Shouldn't there be consequences for people who break the law even if they wear badges? Devin thought about his parents and what they would have done in this situation. His mom had always taught him to stand up for what was right even when it was scary. His dad had told him that good people have a responsibility to speak up when they see something wrong happening. But his parents weren't here anymore, and Devin was just a 12-year-old kid who didn't want to make a mistake that could ruin his life or his grandmother's. As the hours passed, Devin found himself thinking about his classmates at school. What if whatever was in that bag was something that could hurt other kids? What if it was drugs that would end up being sold near the school? Or evidence that could help solve a crime and bring justice to someone's family? By the time the first rays of sunlight started coming through his bedroom window, Devin had made a decision. He couldn't just forget about what he'd seen, and he couldn't tell his grandmother until he knew more about what was really going on. He would go back to the woods after school today. He would find that buried bag and take pictures of it with his phone. Then he'd have proof of what he'd witnessed, and he could figure out what to do next. It was a scary plan, and Devin's hands started shaking again just thinking about it. But it felt like the right thing to do, even if he wasn't sure where it would lead. As he got dressed for school that morning, Devin looked at himself in the mirror again. The dark circles under his eyes were even more pronounced now, and his face still looked pale. But there was something different in his expression, something that hadn't been there the day before. He looked determined, like someone who had made up his mind to do something important, no matter how frightening it might be. Devin had no idea that his decision. The next day at school felt like the longest day of Devin's life. He sat through his morning classes, barely able to concentrate on anything his teachers were saying. During math class, Mrs. Peterson called on him twice to answer questions, and both times he just stared at her blankly until she moved on to someone else. "You okay, man?" his friend Carlos whispered during lunch. "You look like you didn't sleep at all last night." "Yeah, I'm fine," Devin replied, picking at his sandwich. The truth was, he'd maybe gotten 2 hours of sleep, and his stomach was so twisted with nerves that he couldn't eat anything. At lunch, Devin sat at their usual table, but couldn't focus on his friends' conversations about the upcoming basketball game or the new video game that had just come out. All he could think about was his plan to return to the woods after school. Part of him hoped he'd lose his nerve and just go straight home instead. But another part of him knew he had to follow through with what he'd decided. The afternoon classes dragged on even slower than the morning ones. During history class, Devin found himself staring out the window toward the direction of Riverside Park. Somewhere out there, buried under leaves and dirt, was a bag that might contain answers to questions that were eating him alive. When the final bell rang at 3:15, Devin's heart started beating faster. This was it. No more thinking, no more going back and forth in his mind. He grabbed his backpack and headed for the exit, walking past the groups of kids waiting for their rides or heading to after-school activities. "Hey, Devin," called out his teammate Antonio. "You coming to practice today? Coach wants to work on those plays for next week's game." Devin had completely forgotten about basketball practice. "I can't make it today," he called back. "Tell Coach I'll be there tomorrow for sure." Antonio looked confused since Devin never missed practice, but he just shrugged and headed toward the gym. Devin walked quickly through the neighborhood streets, his backpack bouncing against his back with each step. The afternoon sun was bright overhead, but he felt cold inside. As he got closer to Riverside Park, his steps started to slow down. What if those officers were still around? What if they saw him snooping around where they'd buried the bag? But it was too late to turn back now. Devin entered the park and followed the same path he'd taken the day before. The playground was busy with little kids and their parents, and a few teenagers were playing basketball on the outdoor courts. Everything looked normal and peaceful. As Devin approached the wooded area near the creek, his palms started to sweat. He wiped them on his jeans and pulled out his phone, making sure it was ready to take pictures of whatever he might find. His hands were shaking slightly as he held the device. The woods looked different in the bright afternoon sunlight compared to the shadowy late afternoon when he'd witnessed the officers. Birds were chirping in the trees, and he could hear the gentle sound of water flowing over rocks in the creek. It almost felt silly to be so scared in such a peaceful place. Devin made his way to the spot where he'd seen the officers the day before. He recognized the large fallen log they'd used as a landmark, and the area of soft earth near the creek bank. But as he got closer, his heart sank. The ground where the bag had been buried looked completely undisturbed. There were no signs that anyone had dug there recently. The leaves and small branches were scattered naturally, just like everywhere else in the woods. Devin knelt down and started carefully moving leaves and debris aside, thinking maybe the officers had just done a really good job of covering their tracks. But after digging around for several minutes with his hands, he found nothing but dirt and tree roots. The bag was gone. Devin sat back on his heels, feeling confused and frustrated. Had he imagined the whole thing? Had it been some kind of weird dream? But no, he remembered it too clearly. The officers had definitely been here, and they had definitely buried something. As Devin stood up and brushed the dirt off his hands, something white caught his eye. Stuck to the bark of a nearby tree about shoulder height was a small piece of paper that hadn't been there the day before. Devin's heart started racing again as he walked over to the tree. The paper was folded once and seemed to have been placed there deliberately, not just blown by the wind. With trembling fingers, he carefully pulled it free from the bark. Unfolding the paper, Devin found a handwritten address, 1247 Oak Street, behind the community center, 7 p.m. tonight. Below the address, in the same handwriting, were just 4 words, "Come alone. Trust me." Devin stared at the paper, his mind spinning with new questions. Who had left this for him? How did they know he would come back to this spot? And what did they want to meet with him about? The address was familiar. Oak Street was only a few blocks from the community center where Devin played basketball. He'd walked past 1247 Oak Street dozens of times, though he couldn't remember what kind of building it was. As Devin studied the paper, trying to decide what to do next, he heard footsteps approaching through the woods behind him. His body tensed up, ready to run, but a familiar voice made him freeze in place. "Devin, I thought I might find you here." Devin spun around, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Standing about 10 feet away, no longer in uniform but wearing jeans and a simple blue shirt, was Officer Rodriguez. Devin's first instinct was to run. Every muscle in his body was telling him to sprint back toward the main path as fast as he could. But something in Officer Rodriguez's expression stopped him. The officer didn't look angry or threatening. Instead, he looked tired, worried, and maybe even a little scared. "Please don't run," Officer Rodriguez said. raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. I know you're probably terrified right now, but I need to talk to you. I don't know what you're talking about, Devin stammered, still clutching the piece of paper in his hand. Officer Rodriguez took a small step forward, but stopped when he saw Devin tense up again. Devin, I saw you yesterday. I know you were hiding behind that oak tree when my partner and I were here. I saw you watching us. Devin felt like all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. If Officer Rodriguez had seen him yesterday, why hadn't he said something then? Why wait until now? I'm not in trouble, am I? Devin asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. No, son, you're not in trouble, Officer Rodriguez replied, and his voice was gentler than Devin had ever heard it during the officer's visits to school. But we are, and that's why I need your help. Devin looked down at the piece of paper in his hand, then back up at Officer Rodriguez. You left this for me? Officer Rodriguez nodded. I've been coming back here every few hours since yesterday, hoping you'd return. I know this is confusing and scary, but there are things happening that you don't understand yet. Things that aren't what they seem. What was in the bag? Devin asked, surprised by his own courage in asking the question directly. Officer Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, looking around the woods as if making sure they were truly alone. When he spoke again, his voice was barely loud enough for Devin to hear. That bag wasn't what you think it was, Devin, and neither am I. Devin felt another chill run down his spine. What did that mean? And why was this police officer, someone he'd always trusted and respected, standing in the woods looking like he was about to tell him a secret that could change everything? Will you meet me tonight? Officer Rodriguez asked. At the address on that paper? I promise you'll be safe. But I need someone I can trust, and right now you might be the only person who can help us. Devin looked at the paper again, then back at the officer's face. Devin spent the rest of the afternoon at home trying to act normal, but his mind was racing with thoughts about the mysterious meeting. Every few minutes he found himself looking at the piece of paper with the address written on it, wondering what Officer Rodriguez was going to tell him. During dinner, Grandma Rose noticed he was picking at his food again. You've barely eaten anything for 2 days now, she said, setting down her fork and looking at him with concern. Are you sure you're not coming down with something? I'm okay, Grandma, Devin replied, forcing himself to take a bigger bite of her homemade meatloaf. Just nervous about the big game next week. She studied his face carefully, and Devin could tell she wasn't completely buying his explanation. But thankfully, she didn't push the issue further. At 6:30, Devin told his grandmother he was going to walk to the community center to shoot some baskets before it got dark. It wasn't exactly a lie, since the address on the paper was right behind the community center, but it felt wrong to keep secrets from the person who had taken care of him his whole life. Don't stay out too late, Grandma Rose called as he headed for the door. And keep your phone on in case I need to reach you. I will, Devin promised, feeling guilty about deceiving her. The walk to Oak Street took about 15 minutes. As Devin got closer to the address, his heart started beating faster. 1247 Oak Street turned out to be a small, one-story building with a sign that read, Riverside Community Outreach Center. Devin had walked past it many times but had never really paid attention to what it was. The building looked closed, with dark windows and an empty parking lot. But there was a narrow alley that led around to the back, just like the note had mentioned. Devin checked the time on his phone. It was exactly 7 o'clock. Taking a deep breath, Devin walked down the alley toward the back of the building. Behind the community center, there was a small loading dock with a few stairs leading up to a metal door. Sitting on the steps, still wearing the same jeans and blue shirt from earlier, was Officer Rodriguez. But he wasn't alone. Next to him sat another police officer that Devin recognized from school visits. Officer Chen was younger than Officer Rodriguez and always seemed more serious during their presentations. Both officers looked up as Devin approached, and he could see the relief on their faces. Thank you for coming, Officer Rodriguez said, standing up from the steps. I know this whole situation must seem really strange to you, Devin nodded, not trusting his voice to stay steady if he tried to speak. Before we explain anything, Officer Chen said, we need you to know that you're completely safe here. We're not going to hurt you or get you in trouble. We just need someone to listen to our story. Officer Rodriguez gestured toward the steps. Would you like to sit down? This might take a while to explain. Devin hesitated for a moment, then climbed the steps and sat down, leaving some space between himself and the two officers. His phone was in his pocket, and he knew he could call his grandmother or run away if he needed to. Devin, Officer Rodriguez began, what did you think was in that bag we buried yesterday? The question caught Devin off guard. He'd been expecting the officers to start by telling him what had really been in the bag, not by asking him what he thought it was. I don't know, Devin stammered. Money maybe, or drugs? Something illegal? Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen looked at each other, and Devin was surprised to see something that looked almost like sadness in their expressions. That's what we were afraid you'd think, Officer Chen said quietly, and honestly, we don't blame you for thinking that way. If I saw two police officers secretly burying something in the woods, I'd probably assume the worst too. But that's not what was happening, Officer Rodriguez continued. Devin, that bag was full of food, blankets, and medicine. We were hiding supplies to help people who have nowhere else to go. Devin felt like the ground had shifted under his feet. What do you mean? Officer Rodriguez leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. There's a group of homeless people who live in the deeper woods behind the park. Families with children, elderly folks, military veterans who fell on hard times. They've set up a small camp back there where they try to stay out of sight. The city has rules about homeless camps, Officer Chen added. Officially, we're supposed to break them up and move people along. But these aren't troublemakers or criminals. They're just people who have nowhere else to go. Devin listened in stunned silence as Officer Rodriguez continued the story. A few months ago, we got a call about the camp. When we went to check it out, we expected to find maybe a few adults causing problems. Instead, we found 3 families with young kids, an old man who served in Vietnam and a woman taking care of her disabled brother. Officer Chen's voice got quieter. The kids were thin and hungry. The old veteran was sick and needed medication he couldn't afford. It was winter, and they were all sleeping in tents and makeshift shelters. We were supposed to tell them they had to leave, Officer Rodriguez said. That's what the department policy says we should do. But when we saw those children, we just couldn't do it. Devin was beginning to understand, but he was still confused about one thing. If you were trying to help them, why did you have to hide the supplies? Why couldn't you just bring them openly? The 2 officers looked at each other again, and Officer Rodriguez sighed heavily. Because our department has strict rules about officers getting involved in situations like this while we're on duty, he explained. They say it creates liability issues and that there are other agencies that handle homeless assistance. But those other agencies are overwhelmed, Officer Chen added with frustration in his voice. The waiting lists for shelter beds are months long. The food banks are running low on supplies. These families needed help right away, not someday when the system got around to them. Officer Rodriguez stood up and started pacing in front of the loading dock. So we made a decision. We started using our own money to buy food, blankets, and basic medical supplies. We'd bring them to the woods during our patrol breaks and leave them where the families could find them. We've been doing it for almost 4 months now, Officer Chen said. But we have to be careful. If our captain finds out we're doing unauthorized charity work while in uniform, we could be suspended or even fired. Devin felt like his whole understanding of the situation had been turned upside down. So when you said no one could know about it, we were scared of losing our jobs, Officer Rodriguez finished. Not because we were doing something wrong, but because we were breaking department rules to do something right. Officer Chen leaned forward. Devin, there's a little girl back there who's about your age. Her name is Luna, and she hasn't been to school in 6 months because her family lost their apartment. There's also an old man named Mr. Williams who fought in Vietnam and now has diabetes. Without the insulin we bring him, he could die. We're not heroes, Officer Rodriguez said, sitting back down. We're just 2 cops who couldn't walk away from people who needed help. But now we're in a difficult position. Devin looked back and forth between the 2 officers, trying to process everything he'd just learned. What kind of difficult position? Officer Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed Devin a text message. This morning, our captain told us that someone reported suspicious activity in the woods near Riverside Park. He's ordering increased patrols in that area starting tomorrow. If they catch us bringing supplies to the camp, our careers are over, Officer Chen said. But if we stop helping, those families are going to be in serious trouble. Winter's coming, and they're not prepared for the cold weather. Devin stared at the 2 officers, finally understanding why they had looked so scared and desperate in the woods. They weren't criminals trying to hide evidence of wrongdoing. They were good people trying to help others caught between their consciences and their jobs. "But why are you telling me all this?" Devin asked. "What do you want me to do?" Officer Rodriguez looked directly into Devin's eyes. "We need your help, son. But before we ask you to get involved, you need to understand that this could be risky for you too." The shocking truth was finally out. But Devin sat on the steps for a long moment, processing everything he'd just heard. The two police officers waited patiently, giving him time to think about their incredible story. When he finally looked up, his voice was steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "What kind of help do you need from me?" he asked. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen exchanged glances before Officer Rodriguez answered. "We've been talking about this all day, and we think there might be a way to solve this problem. But it's going to require someone brave enough to help us tell our story to the right people. We can't just keep sneaking around forever," Officer Chen added. "Eventually we're going to get caught, and then we won't be able to help anyone. But if we can find a way to make this official, to get the community and maybe even the department to support what we're doing, then we can help these families properly." Devin felt his heart racing again, but this time it wasn't entirely from fear. There was something exciting about the idea of being part of a solution to such an important problem. "What would I have to do?" he asked. Officer Rodriguez leaned forward. "There's a school board meeting tomorrow night. Your principal, Mrs. Washington, will be there, along with parents and community leaders. We think if the right people knew what was really happening, they might be willing to help us find a better way to support these families. But we can't just walk into that meeting and start talking," Officer Chen explained. "It would look like we're just trying to save our own jobs. We need someone else to tell the story first, someone the community trusts." Devin understood what they were asking, but the idea of speaking in front of a room full of adults was terrifying. "You want me to tell everyone about what I saw in the woods?" "Only if you're comfortable with it," Officer Rodriguez said quickly. "We would never force you to do anything you didn't want to do. But Devin, you have something we don't have. You're a kid from this community. People will listen to you in a way they might not listen to us." Officer Chen pulled out a folder from his backpack. "We've put together some information about the families we've been helping. Pictures of the conditions they're living in, medical records for Mr. Williams showing his need for medication, school enrollment forms for the children who haven't been able to attend classes. If you decided to help us," Officer Rodriguez continued, "we'd give you all of this information. You could show people exactly why we felt we had to act, and why these families need support from the whole community, not just two police officers spending their own money." Devin took the folder and opened it carefully. The first thing he saw was a photo of a makeshift camp in the woods, with several small tents and a tarp stretched between trees to create a covered area. In the next photo, he saw children sitting around a small campfire, their clothes worn and dirty but their faces smiling despite their difficult situation. "This is Luna," Officer Chen said, pointing to a girl who looked about Devin's age in one of the photos. "She's been teaching the younger kids their letters and numbers because they can't go to school right now." Devin flipped through more photos and documents, seeing medical records, handwritten notes from parents thanking the officers for their help, and drawings that the children had made. One drawing showed a police officer sharing food with a family, with the words "Thank you for caring" written in crayon at the bottom. "These families aren't looking for handouts," Officer Rodriguez explained. "They want to work, they want their kids to go to school, they want to be part of the community. They just need some help getting back on their feet." Devin closed the folder and looked at both officers. "If I do this, if I speak at the school board meeting, what happens to you? Will you get in trouble?" Officer Chen nodded honestly. "Probably, at least at first. But we've decided that we'd rather face the consequences of trying to help people than live with the guilt of doing nothing. And who knows?" Officer Rodriguez added with a hopeful smile. "Maybe once people understand what we were trying to do, they'll find a way to make it work within the rules." Devin thought about his grandmother and what she would say about this situation. Grandma Rose had always taught him to help others when he could, and to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. She'd also taught him that sometimes good people had to take risks to make positive changes happen. "Okay," Devin said finally, "I'll do it." The relief on both officers' faces was immediate and obvious. "Are you sure?" Officer Rodriguez asked. Once you tell this story publicly, there's no going back. People are going to ask you questions, and some of them might not believe you at first. I'm sure, Devin replied, surprised by how confident he sounded. These families need help, and if I can do something about it, then I should. Officer Chen reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. This is the contact information for a reporter from the local newspaper. Her name is Jessica Torres, and she's written stories before about homelessness and community issues. If you're willing to talk to her before the school board meeting, it might help get more people interested in helping. Devin took the card and put it in his wallet along with the folder of information. When is the school board meeting? Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, Officer Rodriguez replied. At the high school auditorium. But Devin, you should talk to your grandmother about this first. She deserves to know what you've gotten involved in. And you're going to need her support. Devin nodded, knowing that conversation with Grandma Rose was going to be difficult but necessary. The next evening, Devin stood outside the high school auditorium with his grandmother by his side. He'd spent most of the previous night telling her the whole story, from witnessing the officers in the woods to learning about their secret charity work. At first, Grandma Rose had been worried about him getting involved in such a complicated situation. But after looking through the folder of photos and documents, she'd squeezed his hand and said, "Baby, sometimes doing the right thing means taking a risk. I'm proud of you for wanting to help." Inside the auditorium, about 50 people were scattered throughout the rows of seats. Devin saw his principal, Mrs. Washington, sitting in the front row along with several school board members. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen were there too, sitting in the back and looking nervous. When Devin's turn came to speak, his legs felt shaky as he walked up to the microphone at the front of the room. He looked out at all the adult faces staring at him and took a deep breath. "My name is Devin," he began, his voice echoing through the sound system. "2 days ago I saw something in Riverside Park that I thought was really bad. But it turned out to be something really good that was happening in a really hard way." For the next 10 minutes, Devin told the entire story. He described seeing the officers in the woods, his sleepless night worrying about what it meant, and his discovery of the truth about their secret charity work. He held up photos of the homeless families and read from some of the thank you notes the children had written. When he finished speaking, the auditorium was completely quiet. Then Mrs. Washington stood up and started clapping. Soon everyone in the room was applauding, and Devin saw tears in several people's eyes. The next few weeks brought changes that surprised everyone. The newspaper article about Devin's story led to an outpouring of community support. Local businesses donated supplies and job opportunities for the homeless families. The school district created a special program to help children who had missed school get caught up with their education. Most surprisingly, the police department announced a new community outreach program that would officially allow officers to participate in charitable activities. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen did receive official reprimands for breaking department policy, but they were also recognized with community service awards for their compassion and dedication. 3 months later, Devin was shooting baskets at the community center when a girl about his age approached the court. "Are you Devin?" she asked with a shy smile. "Yeah, that's me," he replied. "I'm Luna," she said. "I wanted to thank you for what you did. Because of you, I'm back in school now and my family has a real apartment." As Devin walked home that evening, he thought about how much his life had changed since that day in the woods. He'd learned that sometimes the scariest situations can lead to the most amazing outcomes, and that one person willing to speak up can make a difference for an entire community. But most importantly, he'd learned that things aren't always what they seem, and that the most